Vulnerability management program is definitely a complex effort. It's something that requires multiple stakeholders. It's something that kind of requires a good amount of effort, time, and resources. I would say first things first, we need to better understand what our crown jewels are. We need to understand what the business thinks is worth protecting. And that varies from business to business. I mean, if you are in fintech, what you consider as a crown jewel may not be the same if you're in the healthcare industry, or if you're running a bakery and if all you're doing is baking cakes, then you may not have certain things that are as important as it is for a fintech industry. So knowing the land that you're trying to protect is, I would say, one of the biggest steps. That's where we would have to kind of meet with the execs and kind of better understand what is it that they want us to protect. The biggest learning there is, I would say, is kind of meeting with them often, because business evolves, business changes. There are new products that would be built into the market, and those things that we thought are important might not be that important as we move on. So the first things first, I would say, is a constant check-in with the execs, with someone high up in the chain who can kind of guide us as to okay, this is something that's important for us. Once we have that picture, the next thing is figuring out, okay, what are the processes that support that particular initiative? That's where having a good collaboration with engineering teams, with tech ops, with other stakeholders who kind of contribute towards the process would help. What are the systems that contribute towards this initiative? So now that we have an initiative which is something that we know is important, what are the systems that contribute towards that initiative? So I would say the learning there is having constant communication, constant collaboration with the stakeholders, with the internal business stakeholders, making sure that they are in alignment with what the business is wanting to protect, and they can provide us with the tools or the resources that is required to be protected. The next thing is having the tools to build out the protection. In this case would be your scanners. This is where you would have your vulnerability scanners. And this also directly ties into the budget. I mean, how much is the company willing to spend for this program for the crown jewels that they're trying to protect? That's where we would have to evaluate what the requirements are from the technical perspective. So that's where we would say, okay, here are my information security requirements when it comes to tools. What am I trying to protect? And here's what I would want the tool to be doing. It needs to be able to do authenticated scan. It needs to be able to run scans against containers, etc. So the biggest challenge there is finding the right vendor. I mean, there are plenty of vendors who actually do vulnerability management, but they almost always miss on certain parts, especially around remediation, especially around giving the right priority for a particular vulnerability. Doing their due diligence, I would say, is the next biggest action item, and the lessons learned over there would be in making sure you know what your requirements are, so then we can actually build, or we can look for that vendor who can meet the requirements and the budget, of course. Once we have passed that, I would say the next is using the tool to scan your assets. One of the biggest challenges there are technical controls like firewall rules or ports that are not being opened and all that stuff. So that's where, if we have a nice collaboration with the team, the stakeholders, with the network engineering team, we will kind of build a solution in the infrastructure to a point where it's able to scan the assets properly. There's capabilities around like authenticated scans and external scans and all that stuff. Once that's done, comes the biggest roadblock, is figuring out which ones are important. So now the scan comes out, it spits out with n number of vulnerabilities. Okay, well, obviously I cannot be fixing every single vulnerability. It's not the smartest thing to do. Are they important? Yes, but we need to be able to prioritize which ones are important. A CEF 5 may not be CEF 5 if it's in a stage infrastructure or if it's in a corp infrastructure. Similarly, something with a lower vulnerability would probably not be a low because it's in production. That's where getting a context of the infrastructure is important and having the tool help us prioritize it. So that's the biggest monster which remains to be unsolved by a good amount of vendors out there. Once we have gotten to that point, the next thing is working with your stakeholders in patching. So that's where we would meet with them and coming up with the cadence and making sure that the cadence is actually followed through. And it's something that is feasible for both the stakeholders and also to the business from a risk perspective. And then following through remediation and verification that the patch has been resolved. And then rinse and repeat.